Hey, everybody. I hear a siren there in Nashville, Tennessee. My guests, Calvin and Nelia, on a virtual call with Andrew William Smith, Mr. Smith, to my students, teacher on the radio, to the people who listen to 88.5 FM. We're doing a video call today to revisit.
Are the sirens going to be bad? I'll go shut the windows if
no, it's okay. It's such a beautiful spring day in Tennessee, isn't it? So I was just making sure that wasn't coming from my computer. Hey, everybody, it's Andrew Smith, Mr. Smith, to my students, teacher on the radio, to the people who listen to my podcast on 88.5 FM WTTU on Saturday mornings this semester. I'm talking to my dear friends from Nashville, Tennessee, Calvin and Nelia Kimbrough. I met them when they were living in Atlanta, Georgia, about 12 years ago. They were part of an intentional community called the Open Door Community, which provided hospitality in the tradition of Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker Movement to people experiencing addiction and houselessness in Atlanta, Georgia. But unbeknownst to me at that time, we have a lot more in common than I even realized the day I met them, because they are alumni of Tennessee Tech. They were denizens of Henderson Hall, where I am recording this today. I'm at work today, so I'm in my office in Henderson Hall on the beautiful campus of Tennessee Tech in Cookeville, Tennessee. And for about 9 months, I listened to their stories and looked at their photographs and their other paper archives of the 1960s. And I learned about something that I knew already to be true just from things my parents and friends of my parents had told me about the intersection of the counterculture and the church, which has never ceased to amaze me and enchant me and enthrall me as a scholar, and also as a believer in the resurrected radical rabbi from Palestine, and also as just a curious person about cool cultural things. They were flower children. They got married on the campus by their campus minister just so they could move out of the dorms. Apparently, it was part of it. Anyway, these are my friends. But for the first part of this conversation, they're just going to talk to you all, the current students of Tennessee Tech, class of 28, class of 29, class of 27, whatever you might be, enrolled in the spring 2026 Topics in American Literature, the American Mixtape. And we've been discussing this week and last week, we've been discussing the intersection between Christianity and popular culture and literature, and also current events of our time. Of the 2020s. Calvin and Nelia, welcome to class. Welcome to Teacher on the Radio, and just tell us some stories, and don't be scared. I'm going to make my face go away because they're tired of looking at my face, so they're going to look at your face for a few minutes. Calvin and Nelia, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. When I arrived at Tennessee Tech in 1964, it was a very different place than what it is now. I came from a small town, Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. I had no idea where I wanted to go to school, what I wanted to study. Ended up at Tennessee Tech because I'd been to cheerleading camp there for 3 years. And my roommate was the other co-captain of the cheerleading squad, and we started there together. And I was a math major, then I was a home economics major, then I was a business major, then I was an accounting major. And when I arrived, I had no idea how conservative Tennessee Tech and Cookeville, Tennessee was, but walked into the dorm. And the first night I was there, I came in late, and the house mother met me on the steps and informed me I was in deep trouble. So as a woman coming to Tennessee Tech then, it was very restrictive. We had to be in the dorm at certain hours. Monday night, we had to be in the dorm by 8 o'clock. And you had to sign in and sign out. You weren't allowed to be in a male's room anywhere. If you were caught in a male's room anywhere in the world, the women got kicked out of school. Nothing happened to the guys, of course. But in the midst of all that conservative context, there were people who wanted us as students to have a larger worldview. And many of those folks I eventually met in the history department of Tennessee Tech, especially Dr. B.F. Jones. And I met through the Wesley Foundation. Reverend Bob Lewis was there, and he was one of the folks that enabled me to really get a large view of the world, because through his encouragement, I ended up going with a group of students from across the United States to the Soviet Union in the summer of 1967. And that totally changed my life and what I have done with the rest of my being. So Calvin's going to say a word about Tennessee, about the Wesley Foundation, I think.
Well, I'm going to start with coming to Tennessee Tech because it had an engineering school and I didn't have much money and was the first person in my family to go to college. And so Tennessee Tech, I had really high grades and really good marks on the ACT test and math. And so I came to be an engineer and came partly because it was very inexpensive to come to Tennessee Tech in those days. And so I spent a lot of time in the beginning learning to play the banjo and the guitar in the dormitory because there was music everywhere and many people played. And the guitar that I learned to play on, I was the second person to learn to play on it, and that went on to the third person after me, and I don't know where it went after that. But anyway, so I came to Tennessee Tech, and it didn't take too long for me to discover that I wasn't going to be an engineer. I just couldn't quite grasp the whole thing. And the other kind of subject area that had always interested me in high school, other than math, was history. And so I went to the history department, and that was a good place for me. The other thing that I want to be sure to mention about is that campus life at Tennessee Tech in 1964, 65, 66, 67, 68 was heavily influenced by the ROTC department. It was really a big deal. Every male in school had to do 2 years of ROTC, and it only included males. The females who were included in the program were sponsors for all of the different, I don't know what they were, probably companies or divisions and then a battalion. And the sponsors all had fancy uniforms that they wore, and they appeared at ceremonial occasions. And the big spring dance was the ROTC dance, or I guess it might have been called Ball. The officer? I don't know. Anyway, it was a really big deal.
But one of the things about that was the sponsors, the women had to wear skirts because at that time, women were not allowed to wear pants or shorts on the campus of Tennessee Tech. So like women who were in the PE department, they lived in trench coats because they had to have, wear pants and shorts to be involved in their activities. But women were not allowed. You lived in trench coats or you wore skirts.
Yeah.
Crazy time.
Yeah. So the other thing that was really, the other part of Tennessee Tech that was really freeing for me, besides the history department, was the music department. And one of the things that was really fun about Tennessee Tech in those days was that there were a lot of people making music. So there were those of us that played folk music and protest music, and there were those of us who played bluegrass music, and there were probably a couple of bands, like 2 electric guitars, a bass, and drums on campus. And then in addition to that was the big band in the music department. And by the time we were to 68, they were playing a lot of the 2 bands, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and Chicago music, which was really exciting on the campus. And in fact, in the spring of 1968, they did an outdoor concert on the old quad which was just incredible. It was really quite the presentation by the music department. There were also people who came to entertain us. So like Dionne Warwick and Ray Charles came. And a little side note to the time that Ray Charles came with his band to play in all of our the music department's concerts were in Dearberry Hall, but the other concerts were in the old gym, which you can still go into and take a look around and try to imagine all of us in there for concerts and for basketball games. But when Ray Charles came that time, the person playing the Hammond B3 was Billy Preston. And one of the things that's happening right now is that a new documentary about him has been released, and he's a pretty important Hammond B3 player, especially in the field of rock and roll.
So let me just say a word about the Wesley Foundation before Calvin gets lost in the music world, because it was such an important part of shaping our lives. So the Wesley Foundation is a United Methodist campus ministry off of the campus in state-run schools. So the Wesley Center was right off of the campus there. Bob Lewis was the minister. Bob had the wonderful ability to attract all kinds of interesting and talented people and let them do what they did best. So Marjorie Hargrove came to be the drama director there. She had worked with the Living Theater in New York. She was married to a poet, and they lived in San Francisco over Lawrence Ferlinghetti's bookstore. And then when he became ill, they had to move back to Cookeville, and he died. And Marjorie was then on her own to support a young child as a single mom. But Bob hired her, and she developed a drama program there, and 3 full-scale dramas a term there at the Wesley Foundation. And she also showed foreign movies. So we were introduced to the whole world of film, way beyond the world of Gone with the Wind. Movies I'd never even heard of, or directors, and which opened up a whole understanding of the importance of film in shaping our world. We had coffee houses, we had lectures. The Wesley Foundation became the place where people who were challenging the status quo could meet and talk and plan about what was going on. So in our day, there were not fraternities and sororities on campus. And so, but the Wesley Foundation allowed folks to come and talk about how they might form for sororities and fraternities on campus. And then, of course, they got formed, and there they are. And the folks came to talk about the anti-war movement. So, but it was a place also that would allow a diversity of opinion. So one night, there was a lecture about the war and about the anti-war movement. And folks came, one guy came with an American flag, and on it he had pinned pictures of the atrocities that were going on in Vietnam and Cambodia. And in that same discussion were a number of folks from the ROTC department. So, and everybody could be there in that same room and talk about what was going on, and not explode or not banish one opinion out from the other. So it was a rich cultural place. And Marjorie, through her contacts in New York, would invite artists to come to Tennessee Tech, come to the Wesley Foundation and perform and do lectures. And so there we were introduced to all kinds of art forms playing off Broadway in New York, even though we were in Cookeville, Tennessee. So a lot of our expansive understanding of the world and the politics of what was going on was coming from the Wesley Foundation and from the history department. And that enabled us to have a sense of how we were going to move into the rest of our lives and the work that we were going to be doing.
So one of the things about the Wesley Foundation. Yep. What's up?
Oh yeah, no, you guys froze up for a second, and I hope you guys are coming back. I got your video froze for a second. Can you hear me right now, Calvin?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, your video is frozen on my end, and I'm not sure if that it's going to mess up with the recording. My guests right now are Calvin and Nelia Kimbrough, and we're doing a video call from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm hoping that the internet is going to start to play nice. I'm Andrew Smith, and let's see here. I would love it for you all to really dial in on the fall of '67, spring of '68, and how things really started to congeal to where what was happening in you've already mentioned New York a lot, but how the time period of the movement and the counterculture with the Beatles and all the things that are happening in the country started to really influence the way you did worship. And if you could just tell us a little bit about how the poetry and the music of the time period became part of how you guys did church, and especially I'm interested in you telling about the midnight church service, because I think that's really crazy, and I don't think people really can imagine what something like that would be. But your video is frozen on my side. Hopefully, if you start talking, it'll come back. Are you guys still there?
Yep, we're here. Do you want us to check out and come back in? Do you want us to check out and come back in?
You might need to, and I hate that we're having technology issues. Yes, yeah, let's do that. Why don't you guys log off for just a second and log right back in? Oh, okay. There you are. You're back now. Oh. It unfroze on my side. Hey, everybody, Calvin and Nelia, if you guys could really dial into that, because your lives changed because you guys met each other, and then like things really took off. Fall of '67, spring of '68, and so much is happening. I mean, 1968. The whole world changed on so many different levels so if you could just talk about a little bit of the headiness of that time, but specifically because I think with us not having been there, and I've just seen the worship bulletins and watched, archival films of this, but the way in which the beatnik hippie thing kind of merged with the way that you guys did liturgy at the Wesley, and then having midnight church, that's just so wild to me. This is Andrew, and this teacher on the radio, and Mr. Smith to my students, and my guests this afternoon for this video conversation are Calvin and Nelia Kimbrough, currently of Nashville, Tennessee, and retired pastors in the United Methodist Church, formerly of Atlanta and Evansville, Indiana, and of Tennessee Tech in Cookeville, Tennessee, many, many moons ago.
Okay, so one of the things that was a part of the Wesley Foundation and the Methodist Church in those days was a publication called Motive Magazine, MOTIVE. And you can actually find all of the issues of that publication online these days and have a look at them. They were very avant-garde for the day. The publication started in the 1940s and continued until the last issue was about 1972 or 71, and it was very inspirational to me because it opened up a whole new way of looking at how the world might be, and then secondly, Nia went to the Soviet Union for the summer of 1967. Which was an incredible experience for her. And do you want to say anything about that now?
Yeah, you go ahead and talk about it.
Okay. And then between Christmas and New Year's in 1967, I went to a gathering of about 4,000 college students from across the United States that happened in Cleveland, Ohio. And we were in these large downtown hotels, and we had a conference center in one of the hotels, and every day we had worship, and every one of those worship services was led by a jazz band that was there for the week. There was also a closed circuit television set up with a studio in the main hotel, and the ability in any of the rooms in the hotel to tune into that closed circuit channel that was being broadcast most of the day from the basement of one of these hotels. And people did various different kinds of things. The most popular thing that happened in the whole bit was that a group of students read Ferlinghetti's poem Underwear in their underwear, and it was taped and kept being repeated so that people could see it. There were also, they showed foreign films from about noon every day till about midnight. And then the big occasion for me in particular was the screening of the film The Battle of Algiers, which was brand new in those days, and there was no clearance to get it in the United States yet to show it in theaters, but there was some kind of clearance to send a 35 millimeter copy of it over to the United States for showing at this conference. And so it was shown at midnight in one of the downtown theaters. There were still downtown theaters in those days, and it was a big thing to go during the Christmas season because they always had these big Christmas shows. And it was a downtown theater, kind of like the Lowe's downtown theater was in Nashville, where there was you bought your tickets up in the front, and then there was a long hall that went down to the theater, which was in the back of the building, and the front of the building was offices going up. But you went down this long hall, and we all came in to go to this movie at midnight and stood in the hall waiting to go in the movie. And the people coming out of the movie, the holiday movie that was showing, were like walking down this hall in between people to get out of the theater. And it was like they were half asleep when they started walking the hall. And by the time they got to the end, they were totally awake, because it was the first time I had ever been in a crowd of people where all the Black folk had afros and many of them had overalls on. And that week I was there, I was there with people who had burned draft cards and men who had long hair and beards by then. And it was just a totally different kind of setting at Christmas in 1967. And it was just an incredible experience to see what happened. It was also really interesting for me because I had done my big paper in high school in my senior year on the revolution in Algeria and what had happened there. So anyhow, that was a really big occasion for me.
So let me talk a little bit about the worship service. At the Wesley Foundation, worship was considered to be an experience for the whole community. So we had worship at 11 o'clock, the hallowed hour on Sunday morning, and people came from Tennessee Tech, people came from the community, faculty came. And we developed a liturgy that reflected all of the changes that were going on in the world, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, all of that got incorporated into liturgy. And as Calvin has mentioned, music was very important. And so eventually we decided to have a jazz worship service at 11 o'clock on Saturday evening. And so there was a group of musicians from the music department who came to play jazz for that worship service. They probably would not have entered the Wesley Foundation if they hadn't been invited to come and play the music, but they came and they loved it. And so we had a full worship service with communion from 11 to midnight on Saturday night. And then we turned around and then on Sunday morning had another worship service at 11. And then in the evening had a free meal and a forum and talked about the events that were shaping our lives in the world. So worship and liturgy very much intersected with what was happening politically, what was happening economically. And so it all became one piece, and it allowed folks to come and be a part of that probably wouldn't have come. Folks who came at 11 o'clock on Saturday night probably wouldn't have come at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. But all of us then together made that liturgy and practiced that as a possibility. So one of the other things that happened in liturgy was, I quote, happening. You've probably heard about hippie happenings. And some artists from New York City came down by the invitation of Marjorie Hargrove and created a happening for us as a part of our 11 o'clock worship
on Sunday morning.
And that happening included moving all of us in the congregation from birth through death, and moved us through all of the buildings there at the Wesley Foundation. And we ended up finishing the worship service out in the yard of the Wesley Foundation and celebrating with music and paper flowers and all of that stuff. Just as the church across the street was finishing their worship service and coming out the door. So I've always wished I'd known someone from that worship service who could tell me what they thought about all of us as we were celebrating in that service. So that was a bit of our worship life, and it has shaped Calvin and I for the rest of our lives in terms of how we look at worship and the kind of worship that we do as well.
We're already past the time that I thought we would need, and you were correct, Calvin, in your email to me that we needed like so much time. And I don't remember how many hours of tape, of actual recorded tape, but I've got hours and hours of you all on tape talking about this stuff from 12 and 11 years ago. But just a couple of things I would like for you guys just to touch on very, very briefly, just to wrap it up. First of all, can you explain what you said to me, because it still blew my mind at the time, Calvin, that you didn't see any of this as separate. Like, you didn't see your life in the history department and your life at the Wesley Foundation as being these like separate categories. And you definitely didn't see church as being somehow sacred or holy and separate from everyday life in the late 1960s. That whole idea, if we could try to talk about that for just a second. And then also, you guys were into like, the Beatles, all the other music, the folk music, CSNY and all this. And then the musicals that I adored as a 3-year-old, Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. But you guys and the Wesley scene, it wasn't a drug and alcohol scene. Like, I've seen the pictures of you guys, and you guys look as you couldn't be hipper. And they're going to see, I'm going to show them the slides of what you guys look like. You guys couldn't have been hipper, but you guys weren't like, smoking mountains of marijuana, drinking, homemade, beers and wines, or tripping out on LSD and all this. And like, which is what, of course, I did when I was that age in the 80s and the 90s, but also what I grew up thinking the whole thing was about. So if you could just briefly address how kind of, I don't know, how quaint and like not like a stoner scene it was, and how church to you wasn't this separate, set off from the world, but was just completely the world. I don't know. And that's probably another 20 minutes, but if you could wrap me up in about 5 minutes about those two topics, they're two of my most precious memories I have from our conversation 11 years ago, because I did not expect those answers, either of them, and they made me very, very happy.
Well, I think a part of it for me was having read Motive magazine, because it tied all of these things together as an art and intellectual and music enterprise that was not directly connected to drinking or to whatever kinds of things one might consume. And so that part really helped make sense out of it all for me. The other was, of course, that the professors that I was studying with in the history department were very active in the Wesley Foundation. They were often there for our programs. And we had, I can't remember exactly how all this worked, but we had programs on Friday nights, if I remember correctly, or on Sunday nights. And on Friday nights were more like coffee house things. and Sunday nights were more like having. There were lots of clergy folk from, particularly from Vanderbilt Divinity School, who could drive up to Cookeville and present a program on a Sunday evening and go back. And Bob knew them because he went to Vanderbilt Divinity School. So it was getting this kind of picture of this integration of art and music and theology and even biblical studies that all came together in the same place. The person who came to do the happening for us, who came twice, was Al Carmines, a musician and a clergy person who formed a music, poetry, theater program at Judson Memorial Baptist Church in New York City, and won awards for off-theater production. We went one time to New York when we were in New York City to see one of his plays at the Circle in the Square. It was a time when all of these things seemed to be very be really connected to each other, and it's made sense to me that all of it was connected. It wasn't anything separate. And that was one of the beautiful things about the Wesley Foundation and about being at Tennessee Tech, because it was the history department and the Wesley Foundation that had such an influence over me. And I don't know whether Nelia.
Well, I grew up in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, in a very conservative, small Methodist church.
Hey guys, hey, can you see me here?
Yep.
Yes.
We see you and
my connection got terrible again.
Mm-hmm.
My connection got terrible again. And we're buffering so badly that I can't even understand what you guys are saying. I think we should call it. I won't use obviously the part that is clippy at the end. Can you guys hear me right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the incoming internet from you to me, and I don't know if it's the Tennessee Tech connection or if it's the platform, the StreamYard platform that I'm using. But I don't think any of you were on a roll, Calvin, and it was all great, and then all of a sudden it started to get really, really clippy. Mm-hmm. So and we're at almost 35 minutes, so I'm going to call it for this afternoon. Thank you so incredibly much. I will let you know if I get any feedback from the students on everything that you said today. And I apologize that the technology is not cooperating on my end, because about 3 minutes ago, your signal went like really clippy and buffery, and I lost a lot of what you said. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's probably the university system, which is a lot more conservative now than it was when we were there. And they would all want to hear about how things were in 1967, 68, 69, 70.